Their respective conferences and awaiting their first-round opponents, who do you believe is a scarier matchup in the playoffs, the Jazz or the Sixers?
Well, my answer might be different if Donovan Mitchell hadn't missed all the end of the season and if Mike Conley hadn't been banged up. So I'm going with the Sixers and Embiid and Simmons. They are so tough defensively. They just have to make sure they can score enough.
Malika?
I agree with Jackie on this one, especially when you just consider who might make it the farthest. When you look at the Sixers' path to the the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Statistically speaking, it is the easiest path. It is easier than what the Utah Jazz would have to face. They're a pretty scary matchup, George.
Yeah, listen, I don't want to mess with Joel Embiid this season the way he's playing. That's the way I look at it. It's the Sixers for me. And NBA reporter and writer Malika Andrews. Let's start with James Harden here, who missed over 5 weeks with a hamstring strain. He played in just 2 games before the end of the regular season and wasn't scoring at quite the same level as he was before he got hurt. Here's what he had to say yesterday about his play. Let's take a listen.
Your stats haven't been quite the same in these 2 games back. You haven't been quite as prolific. Do you feel like you're 100% right now?
Yeah, I'm back. I thought winning was all that matters. I mean, when I was doing the stats and putting up the numbers, and it wasn't good enough. So I mean, at some point we got to figure out what we talking about. It's all about winning. Like, I don't care about stats, my impact, and don't have to show up on the stat sheet for us to win. Today in practice, I had 0 points and we won.
So Malika, what are your expectations for James here in the playoffs?
I mean, with those braids, George, they're pretty high. But let's take a look at what he was saying there, right? He's saying that, look, I've been back for 2 games, right? That's all that he was able to play after that 5-week absence for his hamstring. And in those 2 games, yeah, in one of them, the last one, he only had 5 points. In the other, he had 18, which is slightly less than what he's been averaging for the Brooklyn Nets this season. But James Harden has stepped into this role of facilitator. His assist numbers have still been high. He's looking at the fact that he's able to gel rather quickly with this group. And he repeatedly said, you know what, this is not all about me. And he told me that that's a little bit of a shift from how it was for him in Houston. He knew that the weight of the world, especially the brunt of the scoring, they needed him to do that if they were going to win. And he feels a little bit differently, he said, now because of all the ammunition that this team has. So yes, he has high expectations of himself. He went on to say that 1,000%, he thinks that some teams can say things like, if we be the best version of ourselves and do all the right things, then we are going to win. He said in the Brooklyn Nets case, that's actually a quote that applies. So he's holding himself to a high standard, but he's also banking on the fact that not everything that he does for this team, creating that synergy, is going to show up in points per game.
So, Malik, you say a little shift from Houston. I would say a seismic shift from Houston. They did need him to do a lot. And by the way, he wanted to do it. He wanted to have the ball. He wanted all those points, right? I think this is one of the most surprising things that I've seen in a while. What James Harden did when he was traded to Brooklyn, the willingness to be that facilitator that you referenced, to let Kyrie and KD take all the big shots. He's sacrificing shots, minutes, points. And I think if he continues to do that, it's going to help the Brooklyn Nets win the whole thing.
You know, Jackie, it's funny you mentioned that, and Malika, you as well, because when he and Mike D'Antoni got together in Houston, I thought to myself, oh, my goodness, this is going to be like Steve Nash, on steroids, basically, right? Because you're talking about a more prolific scorer with this amazing passing ability, this great court vision. Sure. And I feel like the first year was a little of that, but to your point, Jackie, like it wasn't that at all. Kind of it morphed into something completely different after the fact. It was like the opposite of D'Antoni ball. So, Malika, let me ask you this, though. With Mike there on the staff, like how has that helped facilitate, I guess, James's indoctrination to the team?
Well, James Harden would say it absolutely helped. It was a plus when he's looking at where he wanted to land, which contender he wanted to land with. But he also would say there was a couple of other factors, like playing with Kyrie Irving, like playing with Kevin Durant. And he would say, when he's been asked in the past, that, look, we're all world-class basketball players. We don't need one individual person to make it all work, but it's certainly something that helps. And Steve Nash has said, especially early on this season, because there's been so many variables that are unfamiliar, that are unlike anything else that any team has seen in any season just because of coronavirus, he leaned heavily back on his staff, like Mike D'Antoni, like Jacques Vaughn, other guys that have had this coaching experience because Steve Nash hasn't had it before. But over the course of the season, we've slowly seen Steve Nash just blossom a little bit more in that head coach role, but it certainly helped, right? It didn't hurt Harden's assimilation into the Brooklyn Nets.
Jackie,
Absolutely.
let
me
just ask you a quick question,
George.
because I'd love to just quickly get the answer here from you guys. To me, I look at this team, we all know they're going to score, right? Like, we don't worry about any of that stuff.
Right.
But I wonder defensively, and Jackie, I'll start with you, right? Like, that's been, certainly a point of emphasis that people have focused on. And they've had good defensive moments, but a lot of those defensive moments have come with guys who may or may not be utilized as much in the rotation, right, when it comes to the playoffs, because these three guys are going to play more. So do you worry about them and their lack of continuity defensively at all?
So I asked this question, George, to every GM and every coach that would give me an answer, and they all said, "Are you serious? Don't worry about it. These guys know how to defend and will defend when it dictates it." So I've said, okay, because they know more than I do.
Yeah, I mean, what James Harden said yesterday was pretty similar to what Jackie MacMullan just said, which is that, look, if our defense, that's what we need to worry about. That's what we need to put our energy into and focus on, because we know what we're doing on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, it's about effort. They're going to be filing in behind Kevin Durant, who's going to have the primary assignment of covering a Jason Tatum, but they've said it's a group effort. They know that they may not be a top 10 team in defense. We know that tests the past of who's been able to win championships. It's largely those top 10 defensive teams, but they're banking on doing just enough. And Kevin Durant says if we have that mindset that we're going to do the best that we can be, that will be just enough, because we just need it to be good enough to offset the scoring that they know they can do in bunches.
Quick prediction on the series. We know Jason Tatum can go off at any given moment, right? We saw the 50-point game the other day. Malika, we'll start with you. Just your quick thought on the series.
It's hard to see the Nets losing this one. Jason Tatum is incredible, and the Celtics will certainly only go as far as Jason Tatum will take them.
Jackie?
You know what, George? The Celtics, as long as Brad Stevens there, have held their hat on defense, specifically guarding the three-point line. They have done neither of those things this year. I don't see how the Celtics win the way they've been playing defense all year long.
Yep, I agree with you, ladies, for sure. All right, coming up next, we'll play one of our favorite games, Jump Ball Playoff Pick'em Edition. A little more of this, but first, it's time for our second distant replay of the day. This one from this date in 1993 with Sir Charles Barkley. What do you got here, Chuck? What do we got?
Robinson on Barkley.